Oh, hey, Bradley.
Hello, how are you?
We're all right. It's good to be back in the States and back home.
Oh, good. Out of States, where were you?
I was in Canada. I wasn't far.
Canada. As I say.
Wasn't far. Wasn't
Yeah.
far. Yeah, but missing these reading groups.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I can make this one. This is really, I'm excited. Yeah, I'll try not to talk too much because I'm definitely still way behind on the readings.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can talk if you want. It's not.
Yeah, I'm saying this out loud because I'm like trying to. I'll try not to because I want to hear what you guys have been talking about. You know, I would like
okay.
if I have something to add, of course.
Oh, okay.
Hello. Hi. I did get to talk to someone who does write a lot about ecology and some a little bit about cognitive science today. That was really interesting. I got to meet with Timothy Morton. That was really fun. I don't know if anybody read his stuff, but he's pretty interesting.
Tim who?
Timothy Morton. Here, let's see. He's most well known for his book Hyper Objects in the that was from like the 2007. He was kind of the triple O, like object-oriented ontology, like that kind of. He started out in that world, and more recently he's kind of he's been writing books about what he calls like dark ecology. It kind of is. It's all. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to talk to him a lot more because what he's talking about is so similar to Varela and to neurophenomenology. Like he talks about phenomenology a lot. He talks about Heiddeger a lot and Kant, and he also keeps bringing up the law of the excluded middle, and it's problematic. So I was asking him about intuitionistic math and seeing if he if that was how he was thinking of that. So anyway, I had a fun day today. But I first encountered his work as a literature person. So he's kind of one of those people that straddles cognitive science, science in general, history of science, and literature, and critical theory, and all this other stuff.
All right. So how are you, Jesse and Amanda?
Pretty good. The weather's starting to change here, which is kind of nice, but I know what's to come, so can't really enjoy it.
Yeah.
But my heat finally came on.
Oh, good.
That's good. I may be like finishing ordering food that may arrive in like 40 minutes. Because
okay.
I've eaten today and I'm not really hungry, but then it's like if I want food at all right now, I'll have to get it before everything closes. So we'll see. How are you, Bradley?
Good. I'm doing pretty good. I think we had someone in the Slack wanted to join in with us. I don't know if you saw on the Cognition Futures channel.
I saw Anke Grover and then Rashik.
Yeah, I think it's Rashik. What? I don't know if he's...
I have no idea who they are.
Oh, Rashik is a newer person. I don't know. He said he wanted to join in, but I don't know if he got.
Oh, yeah, also, where did like Andrea replied somewhere? Was that in general?
Yeah. I think she's another new person.
Because I'm not sure. I guess they're finding the lab through like online or something.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw the one about the Reddit post. That was cool. Anyway, so basically, Brian, to catch you up a little bit, we're in chapter 4 of Fuchs' book, and it's taken us a while to get there, and we're happy to be there because he's starting to put together like his actual argument now and how it's different, what he's doing with basically Fourier cognition and saying, well, you know, I would say he's listing a lot of his arguments very particularly against classical cognitive people or the cognitivists or the, you know, connectionists perhaps, or the people who aren't super embodied and all that stuff. But this is the first. I just because I'm so immersed in chapter 4 right now. I feel like there hasn't been a lot of. I don't remember what chapter 3 was about. Oh, hi. How's it going?
Good. I just thought I'd stop by. I noticed you dropped the link for everybody. So.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's anybody can come here. But I was just saying to Brian, we're in chapter 4 now, and I actually forgot what was chapter 3 about at all. Like it's left my mind. But I'm trying to look back and see.
Subjectivity in life, kind of laying the foundations of what we were talking about. That was actually with you guys. We were reading that.
Was it basically just I don't know. Was it basically just him? It wasn't a lot of like. It was kind of just him putting up a lot of context, because I know he put a lot of his models. So. He started to really put his stuff out in chapter 4, but I just like what was chapter 3?
3 is where he kind of reformulates the mind-body problem as the subject body, physical body, dual aspect, not a problem. And he kind of
he talks about he
kind of does like the embodiment 101, some of that stuff, and then gets into circular causality.
Okay, yeah, that's where he introduced his vertical and horizontal causality and all that stuff. Okay.
Yeah,
all right,
diagrams.
Right. That was actually what chapter just. It's like I
finally
got
this picture that we talked about a bit.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see.
I can't read it. But
dual aspect.
Yeah, the dual aspect. That's kind of his. I don't really know how I feel about. Like I get it, but it I don't know why he wants to call. I don't know why, as opposed to just saying. Is it his way of kind of branding the inner and the outer, or is he trying to do like? Is it why is he saying dual aspect as opposed to just like I don't know, like why would you say he kind of made that concept to juxtapose like single? I feel like it's kind of superseding what he says in 4, I guess. It was just like, hey, your conscience extends as far as you can perceive, basically.
Well, the dual aspect stuff he takes from like continental phenomenology, and it's important like dialectically for him because it's 2 aspects of one thing instead of dualism. Instead of there being 2 types of stuff, there's 2 aspects of living things.
Okay, so as part of his kind of let's reframe this stuff, which is kind of what chapter 3 is.
Those two aspects don't. Those 2 aspects are separate. They're distinct, correct?
Yeah. So there's like our subjective experience, and then there's like our body as an object. But he's saying it's not like substance dualism where you have the mind as one kind of thing, and then the body as another kind of thing. It's just it is 2 distinct features of living beings, but like there's no problematic like explanatory gap like there is in traditional like Western philosophy of mind.
Right. So I mean, from excuse me, yeah, from this book, it's the dualism is which chapter were you talking about?
I mean, I think we're talking about chapter 3, but we're going to be talking about chapter 4 now. So, yeah, are you?
I've seen parts of this one, so I've come across it before.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm a bit familiar with Fuchs's views, but I haven't read it recently, so.
So I guess we'll just go into. My notes are a little bit spread out, so I've kind of like a few different things open today. But I did take some notes in. It kind of was only the first, basically 4.1, which is more about the inner milieu and the brain in the context of the organism, and basically vertical causality, as he talks about it. So, but I did look at, I basically read through the chapter and got most parts and over the summary and all that stuff. So, I think I can look at this and go from here. Hold on a second. Is there anything people wanted to kind of start with for this one, or just kind of continue where we left off last time, which I'm not exactly sure where that was, but I can find my last note in the discussion.
I want to make sure we get to transparency because I thought that was very interesting.
Has everybody read the whole book, or are we on a specific chapter?
We're basically up to 4 right now, but some people are further ahead.
We're starting in on it.
I don't know remember what was in which chapter though, but
yeah. So Amanda, do you want to kind of start off talking about that, or do you want to continue to just go through the chapter? I know we basically got into we're around like 120, maybe around 120. Is that even?
Transparency doesn't come in until later.
Yeah, transparency like 4.2 something. But yeah. Okay. I think we're almost at the weird. It looked particularly creepy because I had a black screen. It was like inverted, but it kind of. I think let's basically start at like 4.1, which is just kind of past the introduction anyway. But this is where he's getting into. I'll just share my screen.
Page 107. Yeah.
4.1 starts in 109.
Okay.
Chapter 4 is a pretty big chapter, but let's see. Here we go. All right. Turn this stuff on.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Now I'll probably be looking at a bunch of other things because my notes are separately. But anyway, so yeah, the first part would basically he kind of goes over, here's classical cognitive stuff, here's the 4A stuff, and then he's saying, well, we got to push us beyond that, and so on. So the inner milieu, we talked a bit about this. He's kind of setting up things here in terms of what the milieu is. I think we covered some of that stuff. He's basically attacking that. A lot of this chapter and this part of the chapter is basically don't just focus on the neocortex, because there's more than that. Okay, so the feeling of being alive, I think we kind of ended about here. He's basically saying, moving past the Cartesian division and whatnot, the feeling of being alive. And he kind of gets into these theories, and I have, I'll just show the text right now instead of my other notes. I'm going to pull up my notes here. This is basically where he is getting into, that the most baseline of our stuff here. Okay. Yeah.
I think a good way to
what's that?
Sorry. I think a good way to summarize that idea is like this basal affective experience is he's describing like a minimal kind of consciousness and explaining how that is still it's like fundamentally embodied. Like there's a minimal kind of interoception that we just can't imagine mind without.
Yeah, and he kind of goes like he uses
I believe the protoself arises before reflection. Is that correct?
Right.
As in, like, it's kind of what goes on before we even say, like, ask the questions of like why or how or what about ourselves or about our experience or about our observations in life. If I have a certain reaction to something, whatever is the first you just whatever's the first like urge or instinct that comes into my mind based on my own experience in life. That's it, right?
It maybe even it's prior to that. It's like the background of that.
Okay. Yeah.
I think the background metaphor makes sense. Backdrop.
yeah, and he's basically actually gonna start yeah, I'm ordering some food from the other stuff.
Beantown.
Beantown sort of our weird name for Boston. I don't really. But I'm going to start my live stream / private recording thing of this that is live stream because it's easier that way.
All right.
Here we go. All right. And I may finish my order too. I don't know. I probably won't.
Live streaming is on.
Anyway, yeah. He kind of gets into these. Basically, Fuchs is putting together all these different, like Damasio's theory and that other person's name, Pansky.
Penska. Yeah.
And kind of he's bridging together the theories to kind of make his sort of combined theory about stuff. The protoself, and it basically ties it to like the underlying affect of just, being able to sense yourself. And he starts talking about interoceptive loops. Do we have any feelings about the different theories, like Damasio's theories, or this is where it ends here?
I don't have any strong feelings about it, but
I think it's definitely very appealing to me as a neuroscientist, especially given its roots in a lot of these physical bases of the brain, and it definitely seems very appealing. But the reductionism that is involved, it presents just so many problems, and it's kind of difficult to. I think in some ways it can be a bit difficult to theorize about how certain processes involved in mentalization may come about alongside Damasio's theory and Fuchs's just overall Fuchs's overall goal in how we can see like ourselves and consciousness as being the result of these patterns of neural activity. So there's my take.
Yeah. So I don't know if we want to talk any more about Damasio or Princip or anyone else, but we can go into those, like the models or not. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, yeah, why don't we get into the models? That's usually pretty productive.
So what's your take on them?
I don't know. Let's take a look.
Which models?
Well, we kind of just talked about Damasio's protoself stuff. And then, I'm not sharing my screen.
Sharing your screen now.
Okay.
There we go.
And he talks about concept.
Yeah.
Model. I think this is the one about the Cognition or basic instincts and corresponding motivations. And this is the
You know what's really fascinating? I think Damasio's theories of consciousness of the self in the context of narratives about how we understand our own selves as human beings within our kind of own stories, and especially in the context of certain neuroscience research related to, say, trauma, for example, when an individual experiences events that in some ways distort their view of their own self. That's where I find it really fascinating, even in some even like clinical and psychiatric contexts too. So, yeah.
That looks like what chapter 5 is going to be about, and then the last part of the book does focus on psychiatric stuff.
Yep.
But the next chapter is about like humans as social beings. So that'll be cool.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with concept stuff, so I don't know if there's anything you want to particularly, or you wanted to say about them, Bradley. But
Yeah, I'm not really. Yeah, I don't have anything to say yet. But
he mentioned the periaqueductal gray.
Yeah, those are just the neural structures that are involved in some of the things he's talking about. It's largely the circuits that are involved in interoception and emotion. So, yeah. So I'm just thinking about this in terms of embodiment and thinking about how could we test something where we said that something without, like, say, interoception behaves versus something with interoception. And I was just thinking about like our Braitenberg vehicles and how, those are embodied, and you have like you could have a small nervous system inside of it. And, then the question is if we put maybe like an interoceptive system into it, would that make a difference in terms of how it behaves? So if you had like the sensory inputs, like say the light sensors or something, and then the effectors, but then you had another middle layer, which would be like interoception, maybe from the sides, experiencing like ego motion and things like that. I wonder what that would look like. I'm just curious. I'm just thinking of a way computationally to test some of this sort of thing, where you have this, you have embodiment on the one hand, so you have this sort of sense of where the agent is in space, but then you need to really have a sense of it, maybe a further sense of it. So, that's what I'm thinking about right now. I don't know if that's interesting to anyone else, but
yeah, I could see. I don't know how to quite do that either, but I could see that being an interesting way to sort of.
It'd be very hard to say, like, take an organism and strip out the interoception and say, well, actually, that may not be true, because there are animals that don't feel pain, or there are other animals that, I guess you could make maybe some lesions, key lesions or something that would allow you to do that. But I think it's quite interesting. If you're making a claim that there's something that's the seed of it, seed of conscious experience, then, maybe we can sort of simulate what that would be like. How do we characterize that mechanism, and how do we sort of dissociate it from like information processing or something like that?
To make a hydrocephaly model. Okay, and I know he kind of brings up the models a little bit more in terms of his combined model, but do you want to say anything about this discussion here with what happens when you don't have some of your neuroanatomy in place? It basically says the cortex is not necessary for the feeling of life
itself.
living. Yeah.
So
Um,
basically, these people don't have a cortex, or they have a deformed cortex, and then now they can say, well, you can still feel things, or you still have conscious feelings, even though you don't have maybe the sensory territory to experience it, I guess.
right, and apparently Damasi is saying how
Right.
you can. They have very visceral reactions, like when they like music, and you can see it in their face. So even if they don't have these, higher level quote unquote faculties available, it's all justifying this basic sense of feeling alive. And then he juxtaposes that to the higher levels of consciousness here. Is it 16? Oh, we have this here. What did we highlight before? He's basically saying here, I may be skipping ahead a little bit, but he's basically saying how over time, like he's saying, okay, you don't need the neocortex for your basic feeling of alive, but as the subcortical things and then the cortex are evolving and you're interacting more and more with the nature, you have severe. Oh, that's right. I wanted to ask, what does he mean by deep body here? Is that a term people are familiar with? Because I don't think he explained that. Or is that just sort of his?
Well, I think that's the
Not
next
religion.
sentence. Self-affection and conation of the body. Conation being like these basic states where your urges and then the body of foundation and source of our intentional directedness towards the world. If there is something it is like to have intentional conscious experience, and if indeed all experience contains a sense of mindness, then this felt dimension is derived from the organism's elementary self-affection, which precedes every sensory motor contact and objects mediated by the cortex. So basically the system of whatever it is that we're getting at is sort of intervening in the sensory. So you're feeling something through your senses, and then this is intervening. It's almost weighting it, I guess, or it's additive or something like that. So you have this.
Referring to specific structures within the nervous system, or is it more used in a representative sense?
Well, I guess it could be both. They don't really say. I mean, I'm just trying to put it into a sort of a
It's interesting. It's interesting because it's referred to as the deep body, which could imply like, oh, are you referring to say like the, hypothalamus and amygdala, but not exactly. I don't think that's exactly how it's being used here. So.
Yeah.
I read deep as just like background, like this basic self-affection, whatever he calls it. I just read deep as like another metaphor for basic or background. Yeah.
Whereas I read it as an anatomy deep, which is I think maybe what you were saying, Hussain.
Yeah.
Because of the basal endogenous affectivity, like a deep feeling that's coming from as deep inside of your body, like anatomically deep, meaning like in the center.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps even down to say vagus nerve or parasympathetic nervous system, as opposed to neo or prefrontal cortex, like right there, pointing to my head, like at the forefront of the brain. So.
Right, I guess the deeper parts of the brain would be the parts responsible for the most minimal form of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then we get to 4.2, which is sort of his big, his model combining some of the other things, and feeling of being alive, drives and basic affects, and you have these sort of emotions. And I did like, it was kind of cool. I like how he kind of put emotions as sort of goal directed. Like these are sort of I don't know if he said it this way, but sort of like the homeostatic directives, like, okay, we want to get closer to whatever this outcome is. And any thoughts on this figure 4.2?
No, but I think we need to circle back to homeostasis too, because he mentions that up there. So that's an important part of this So, homeostasis is maintaining sort of a set point. So if you perturb the system, I mean, if you just like have this thing going on, this background, you can feel alive, but most of your life is being perturbed in one way or another, either emotionally or your position or in space or whatever. And so then you have to maintain this set point. And so they mention homeostasis. And I mean, that kind of, when you draw a model like this, you always have to think about that aspect of it. If you're getting feedback, if you're able to return to your set point and so forth.
This is a really interesting section upcoming, because I feel like in the next basically page he drops the resonance term, and then but what's immediately following this part is sort of I think he mentions basically we kind of mentioned this too. It's chapter 5 stuff. Yeah. The later development is no longer predetermined genetically, but proceeds under influence of early environmental and socialization experiences. So he's kind of getting to what we talked about for chapter 5 there. Let's see. And there's this discussion a little here about like representational stuff. And I don't want to skip Bradley's the homeostasis stuff. I'm going to be coming back to that.
Okay.
But there's kind of this section here, I feel like I kind of put in my actual notes on my other section. This whole kind of section here is sort of this discussion again about representations, which he comes back to in like 4.2 something else. But I highlighted something specific here. It doesn't seem to be here. Oh, here. A representation relation presupposes that the representing and the represented may be separated from each other. And I know that's kind of his, especially in the end of this chapter, he basically really targets this specifically. But I think would people who are, I guess it makes sense with classical cognitivist stuff, but are there people who are pro-representation who would disagree with that in any way? I think that's the question I had. I don't think so, but I feel like I don't know how much he's reducing anything with this statement. Maybe nothing.
Well, I think it's this relation of allostasis, actually. So you have these states that you are sort of open-ended, they're changing with your interactions with the environment, and then you have to sort of, where the neural system has to sort of map itself to one of those states, and it has to sort of maintain a set point at one of those states. But the state is always changing because you're interacting with the world. So it's not, I don't know if it's like, if you have to separate them out or just basically think of it a little bit differently. Like I said before, we live in a world where we're always interacting with it. And so if we do an experiment, we're only capturing it in one state. We're not capturing the dynamics of it. And so this is important to, your experience. It's continuous. It's not discrete. You have to think about this in terms of like how these states might change, how your internal state might change, but also external state is always perturbing those, your internal state. So it has to sort of make it to some set point to be in a stable state. So it's like you're always taking information in from the environment. You're always adjusting. And then those states might even change if you have the proper stimulus there. Or if you have like something in your development that modifies that trajectory somewhat of normal development. Like we saw in the other example there with the, I don't know what they called them. I can't remember the name, but you know what I'm talking about. The picture that we just saw in the last picture.
The paradigm. The
hydroencephalics, yeah.
So it seems like even prior to the protoself, there is something. Is that correct? The protoself isn't the very bottom. there are structures even before the protoself. Is that correct?
Looks like,
Are you asking what Bradley said or what Fuchs is saying?
well, it looks like just autonomous regulation, whatever that means. And I assume there's some structures involved in that are working, but he doesn't put that in the figure. So
Yeah.
that's an important thing too, is that regulation isn't just like something that happens. You have to usually involve some set of structures, or, maybe that's not even correct, because I think of regulation, I think of like throughout the system, not just like an input. I mean, you can have an output of regulation, but it's not like, yeah.
I think this would be a great, we don't have to get into this now, but this would be, in my mind anyway, this basically is a wonderful tangent into a lot of what Levin talks about in terms of, you have all these like, I think about the buzzword or the word in my mind, like just like agental materials, like everything in the biological sense, like there's these biological machines that are doing stuff that they're going to do, like they're doing that stuff, and that's not, that means that's a bit of the pieces, they're components that are working together, but there's this sort of part of the regulation that's super foundational.
I mean, just quickly looking at Wikipedia, Damasio argues the protoself is the most basic form of the self.
Yeah, I think he's basically trying to get it to like sort of, I don't want to say atomic because that's weird here, but the most, that which cannot be divided any further in terms of the self. And it's like you kind of have to have this stuff underpinning it. And as a total aside too, and direct kind of Bradley and some of our orthogonal labs theory work, it'd be fun to kind of revisit some of the metabrain stuff in general about this, because it basically sort of like, you could say this whole, everything to this line too is like the underlying work, and the metabrain is all the stuff on top of it in one sense, or where would you draw lines differently to sort of deal with different parts of that concept? What do you, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because we argue that your layers of the metabrain are representational, correct? So it's like you have a very low level representation at the bottom, and then higher levels are representation at the top. And so you could say like, this proto-self is sort of a very low level of representation. You could, however you want to model that, and then you have inputs to that, but it's always like the upper layers that are doing more of the representation, and maybe even feeding back to that. I don't know how that would, it could play around with that, but I think it's definitely within that sort of framework would work.
Yeah, and that combined with like, they're not here and they're kind of taking a break from this stuff, so it's really tough. But in one parallel timeline of sorts, I would have Ava would be right here saying, yeah, like there's a discussion to be had about emotions as this sort of guiding mechanism that steers in terms of their allostatic kind model. I'd be really curious to see what they make of that, and also sort of later things in this particular later on the chapter about sort of the extendedness of things. But there's a lot with sort of the allostatic kinds work too. But I think the best thing to do about that right now is just sort of mention it and then maybe come back to it later when everybody wants to talk about it. But yeah, my question about I don't know, where did it go? He going back to the text, I mentioned this sort of the necessity of the separation here, and then he kind of, his take on that, of course, is within such a loop, there's no, you can't have the separateness of it. So he's very continuing to combat and deconstruct or
the separate representation. You mean like in terms of, I think you missed about like what he's talking about, fusion of body and perceptual states. So that's what he's talking about up there. So in this quote, or this is Damasio, I guess. This unit enacts a functional fusion of body states and perceptual states. So the dividing line between the two can no longer be drawn. So it's like the body state and the perceptual state is fused together. So if you're perceiving something, the body has the same, I guess, state, but there's also the stuff that's intervening. Within such a loop circuit, however, there is neither place nor time for a separate representation. So Fuchs is arguing that that's, you can't separate the representations if that functional fusion is also true. And so then he goes on to say,
yeah, he continues to push towards you can't really localize it, and thus the integral consciousness as the integral.
Well, go back up a little bit. Back up in that paragraph. He also talks about resonance. So instead of an imaging or mapping relation, which is the representation he was talking about, so it's like you don't want to map between, like, say, I guess it's body states and like something else. We should therefore speak of resonance between brain and body. So resonance is like, something where there's feedback, or it's vibration, or there's like resonant frequencies, which are like similar frequencies, in different bands. So that they're, he's using his term resonance, which means that there's a resonance between like what's going on in the body, what's going on in the brain. And then I guess that's a neat trick in some ways to get around some of this representational stuff. This is not just a quarrel about terms. We are dealing with the decisive question whether basal consciousness is ultimately still created in the brain, or whether the body actually is the rock on which the protoself is built. So now you're saying that, does this happen in the brain, or does this happen with the body's, like the body basically serving as that lower layer and being fundamental to the protoself? And there's a resonance term, I guess, is, where there's a resonance between the body and the brain. So if there's no resonance there, and I don't know how he gets into the dealing with that, because it's a physical term, and we're talking about this relation. So I don't know, but that's where he's going with that.
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of what one of the next sections is about, and I think that'll be a pretty interesting discussion because it's sort of it's a little like signal versus noise, and then you get, once you can understand what's being said, then you can have the ability to resonate, to have resonance in the different aspects of like the mind and body and the environment. And then some things, enters your consciousness, or however he phrases it. So he didn't phrase it that way. Don't think about that actually, but yeah. Okay. Algebra. And he kind of talks about, some arguments against embodied mind, and where should we draw the line? Is it the encephalon, the brainstem, the spinal cord? And he says, well, this seems kind of arbitrary. Yeah, we're good about there. All right.
In some ways, he very artfully dodges things. Like he'll say, well, this is very important, this term. And then it's like, well, I don't know. It depends. But
anything we wanted to say before we go into embodied affectivity? There's a couple of things here about integrals.
I think you were this, right?
What was that?
At one point, he literally says like it's the interval, the area under the curve.
Yeah.
Okay.
He
I want to make sure.
he goes, I use it as a metaphor to signify the integration which consciousness achieves over an extended basis without being separable into representation. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So embodied affectivity. My notes All right. Oh, well. Yeah, actually in my notes, I kind of raised a similar point to Bradley did, but I missed them because I wasn't looking at them. So thank you, Bradley.
What was the point?
All right. All right. So what does he mean by embodied affectivity? Any takers on that? Kind of just interpret as sort of reiterating the baseline, some basal affectivity stuff. Highlighted this: a purely disembodied human emotion is a non-entity. What's that?
He goes past the basal stuff to talk about how even like emotions and even what he calls secondary emotions such as shame, sadness, or envy are still fundamentally embodied. Still something that happens in the whole body, not just in the brain. I like this section because I took a philosophy of emotion seminar, and there are a lot of views that are like variations on the view that emotions are judgments. Emotions are judgments of the truth of a proposition. And that was just, some of those papers just seemed wild to me. And like, does the author just have a fundamentally different experience of the world and their emotions? Because this was all very intuitive to me.
Right.
And the views that
usually,
like perception
yeah,
are
they
much
usually
more intuitive to me.
Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. I mean, beyond just the semantics of what an emotion is, usually we see the debates between whether emotions are somatic body responses or whether they do involve an affective and cognitive components, right, in philosophy. So.
It's interesting. I've always been dancing around like Lisa Feldman Barrett stuff about how emotions are made and how they're constructed. And I think Fuchs is pretty much not combative towards her. I think her views have matched with this, but I don't know her well enough to say. But Avery's read the book, it's in the books too.
There would be a way to say that like emotions involve cognition and judgments and that those are, socially constructed in a significant sense, and to still say that they're embodied because you just bring in Fuchs's vertical causality story.
Yeah, and that's basically what we're saying here. This is sort of an interesting potential objection about it. Like if you have this conviction, so figure 4.3, cycle of embodied affectivity, emotion. I like that emotion there.
It's motion through the internet.
Yeah.
That's a bit peculiar.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone want to talk about how he kind of breaks down emotions here, or he talks about like centripetal, centrifugal components, this stuff?
Yeah, that might be good. So centripetal and centrifugal are different types of motion around, like rotational motion. So, or the effective rotational motion on things. So that's the physical context. Yeah. Oh, we've got a paper as a diagram originally from. Okay. Oh. So yeah, why don't we talk about that? So a centripetal or effective component. So this is an effective component that is being affected, moved, or touched by an event. Oop.
And did you still want to talk about that specific?
Yeah, you're sharing your screen and it fell off. I don't know what happened. happened?
No, I just closed it because I didn't know if we were gonna.
Oh yeah, I was reading the screen, but yeah. So that is being affected, moved, or touched by an event through various forms of bodily sensation. Already mentioned blushing or burning of shame. This resonance in turn influences the affective perception of the situation. So, for example, the feeling one's heartbeat and the shortness of breath increases the frightening impression of a dangerous situation. So I guess what he's saying is that there's something going on in the body. There's a physiological response that you can feel that's physical. And then that contributes to this sort of affective component. Or it's kind of like maybe moving out and then feeding back in. So it's centripetal in that way. So it's moving out from the, like, you know, the nervous system is doing something in response to an emotion, and it's increasing your heart pumping or you're blushing, and then that feeds back to the emotional state. So it's moving out and then coming back in. Centrifugal, which is I guess, you know, when things go inward, if you have something rotating around, or emotive component, that is a bodily action readiness, implying specific tendencies of movement, hiding, avoiding the other's gaze, sinking into the floor. So you're kind of like, you know, shrinking back when body language and things like that. Can you move the screen down to the next page? In emotions, we are moved to move. So emovere, to move out. So it's like you're moving your body outward or inward, and this is feeding back to the emotional state, where it's either validating it or regulating it or something like that. I think it's interesting. That's it. I guess that clarifies a little bit for me, anyways. The whole idea of resonance between the brain, what the brain's generating in terms of emotions, the interoceptive system, and then what the body's doing. The body isn't just there as like a bulk thing that's oriented in space. That's generating these movements. It's generating these sort of states on the body, and then it's feeding back. And that's sort of that's part of it. Yeah. So then when those things are in sync, that's resonance, and it's producing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He gets the section on resonance, I think, does a kind of gets into that. Oh, he explains why he says emotion here. That's cool. Well, I get sort of. I missed that before.
Embodied emotion.
Doesn't make any sense. What? No, it looks like it's just a typo that he made. No, never mind. It's not a typo. It's not a typo.
Yeah, it's in his original paper as well.
Okay.
But he's same thing, which is basically he just keeps juxtaposing it next to embodied affectivity and says, like, yeah, it's our embodied motion. We are moved within our bodies. Never really gets more specific.
Medium of our affective engagement. Okay.
I also liked this discussion because in that seminar I mentioned, all the papers we read were like pointing to a very specific part of like this, all of these processes, and saying, this is the emotion. No, like this, the judgment of the proposition is the emotion. No, the bodily feeling is the emotion. And Fuchs kind of explains how it can be all of that. It's the motivational aspect. It's associated with judgments about the world around you. It's bodily. Like there's no need to pick one. It doesn't make sense to just isolate one.
Yeah. And I think I keep thinking about sort of just, I don't know which part it's in. I may have passed it already, but it basically, emotions is sort of, well, I guess we'll just say movement oriented, but directed towards something, and I think that's useful. A lack of resonance will impede perceiving affordances in the environment. I think that's a pretty key component to his ideas too, actually.
And again, they're referring to environment, including like so the lack of evidence for the bodily resonance and the bodily resonance. with the affective affordances in the environment. Which environments, or what specifically are they referring to with the environments here?
I think things outside the body.
Just outside the body, or including, say, mental representations, like an idea or a thought or an image?
I'm not sure what his opinions on that are.
That's fine. So yeah, I mean, because I would think even as one comes to understand their own body, they would produce these ideas of the proto-self, which alongside would come with which would come their own ideas, like feeling ashamed, like something happens in your life, like if we're having a meeting and someone's running late, and you start to feel angry that someone is not there right now, then there's the idea that they are late, and that in turn would be part of the environment too. Would that make sense? In these embodying the emotions themselves?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, at least it could be situated. I mean, you have an idea that kind of takes on a life of its own, or, you generate this idea about like a perception and it becomes part of the environment. Yeah, I mean, that's, and he's talking about feedback loops, so everything is like, goes out of the body and comes back into the body. So, like, if you have this conception of your body, it goes outside and you act upon it, and then there's a feedback from that action. So, yeah, I think that fits in.
Right. For Fuchs, it's probably safe to say that the environment is full of affordances, and affordances are like fundamentally a relationship that involves the agent. So there's just like there's no agent without an environment, there's no environment without the agent and other agents.
So this is the summary of sort of the first half of the chapter, where he's basically talking about the vertical, everything inside the, I would say agent, but the alive being. So basal stuff. Any sort of other comments or thoughts before we go into the second half of the chapter? Running in the summary, you wanted to discuss more. Okay. So, yeah, this is basically what this part is about. Everything above it passes vertical. Now we're going horizontal in terms of this model about the brain as the mediator and the mediated immediacy. Okay, let me switch this up here. Any opening thoughts on this subchapter if you want to lead with? He basically starts off by kind of presenting the critique, presenting the argument he's kind of attacking about, old the outdated folks think in a very linear way, and he kind of uses this model to explain his views. It's boom, boom, boom. Okay. Let's see.
Could you scroll up to that diagram just real quick again? Yeah, the one you were just pointing out. Okay.
I think it's there. Yeah.
Okay.
So he basically juxtaposes that with another diagram and saying, well, actually, more is about open loops. So what's our take on loops and open loops and this idea of having an open loop where we're kind of looking for stuff? And this actually basically answers the question that kind of what Amanda was saying, like, well, I think Fuchs would see it like in the environment, there's sort of this all manner of opportunities to complete a loop about something. So I'm in this, I'm at a situation that I'm expecting something to happen, doesn't happen. So, you know, I think you could say it's sort of a possibility manifesting in this way. What do we think of this diagram or the open loops concept?
So why don't we differentiate between an open loop and a closed loop? Because they're usually used to the closed loop. So we think about closed loops as the stimulus, the sensory and motor stimulus response. But it's this tight
Kind of.
feedback, right? Well, we could go to this one again. Well, yeah. So I mean, it's usually.
I think it's a little bit delayed. So I'm showing the 4.4 again.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. So this is I guess is the open loop. Correct. So this is where you have something going forward, you're anticipating something. And you're not really relying on feedback necessarily. Or I'm just trying to get my head the difference between the open loop and the closed loop in terms of like what the consequences.
That image 4.4 is not a loop. That's supposed to be the linear
It's just
causality
linear,
that he's arguing against.
But what is an open loop then? It's not a loop. It's a
No, the open loop.
That's what he's critiquing, basically.
right.
Um,
But what is?
So I guess this is the open loop because the object is not yet closing the loop.
Okay. And how does it close the loop?
I think in his
You
term
close
of,
the loop with the object when you start using the object. Like he uses writing with a pen as an example.
Okay.
You close the loop when you are using the pen.
Right,
When you're
like-
trying to, yeah, go ahead.
like when you're I think I don't know where it is, I think it's coming up next, but like the example of the pen was kind of like you know, where does writing take place? Is it in your hands? Is it in the pen? Is it in your mind? It's like, no, it's the whole thing is the writing itself. And how sort of I would kind of say I had a really nice thing I wanted to say about this and it kind of slipped my mind. Closing the loop is sort of resonance is sort of closing the loop when all these things are sort of activated and able to be interpreted and sort of made clear, and then they can all be happening in concert. I kind of wonder how that works with Shamaro's synergy stuff. But let's try to find that pen, the writing example. I don't know where it is in the book.
It's probably above that figure because he mentions the pen right below. There it is.
Yeah, writing is an interaction between systems, organism, environment. We cannot receive it as two separate systems. We can't, and he's basically making the claim that it won't fit. I think the linear model because in the achievement we can no longer distinguish them from one another. And he's saying, you know, this is where where does the writing happen, kind of a thing. This kind of reminds me of, was it the same book or was it another book with Verla? Was like, where is the pain? Remember that line where I was like,
Yeah.
is the pain in your leg? Is it in the neurons? Is it in your the connective tissue? Is it what part of where is the pain located? And this is sort of maybe a different take on that.
That was this book.
Was this
earlier in the book, yeah.
Oh, well, there we go.
But it's still, so I guess an open loop, if I were writing with a pen, an open loop writing assignment would be to just draw something without any feedback, without any sensory
Okay.
feedback.
The difference between open and closed loop is that the open loop does not self-correct.
Right. Or
So
at least
it doesn't. Yeah.
if you
I
get
don't-
feedback, it doesn't self-correct. So there's no, like, you might get feedback and you don't act on it. It's just kind of like this noise. So if I were,
from what I understand, I don't believe the open loop necessarily implies that there must be something in the environment, like outside of the brain or outside of the body or outside of the organism. It's just whether like the open loop would be kind of, think about like an emotion that might cause someone to spiral or catastrophize. That's how I'm understanding it. Like something that you can't regulate and internally understand. Would that describe it? Like an open loop?
yeah,
I'm not sure how to think about it with that kind of like psychological example, but back to the pen, it seems like once you are holding on to the pen and using it, you
Yeah.
close the loop.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the
yeah.
use of the tool.
Yeah.
so there's been a lot of work on brain-machine interfaces where they do like, maybe like a manipulation task where and this is in humans and clinical patients, where they think about something and they have to manipulate that thing, but they don't have like a body to do it because they're like quadriplegics or something. So they have like an implant and they generate a thought, and that thought then is translated, the electrical activity is translated into some sort of output state that maybe a robot might perform instead of their body.
Yeah.
And so that's, maybe that's open loop. Maybe observing the robot doing the action is closing the loop. But yeah, I mean, that's okay. So that's a good way to think about it.
Well, it would depend. It would depend. Like if there were a corrective feedback mechanism where, like say my BCI or my brain computer interface would be, detecting how something moves on the screen in front of me, and I'm looking at it as I'm using it, and able to, if I want to move it from point A to point B, and I can see it, so then the loop would be closed. But it's open if it's doing something that I myself can't see to accordingly change that. So I guess yeah. Hey Jesse, could you explain what Vorgestalt is?
Actually, I can, and it's related to something that I wanted to talk about with regard to
Okay,
this.
you can explain. Yeah.
Please,
Which-
Brian, go ahead.
So it's related to these two German terms from Heiddeger, Vorhanden and Zuhanden. And Vorhanden is like when something's ready to be handed to you, and Fuchs actually mentions this explicitly otherwise. So the other part of Vorhanden is Zuhanden, which is like you got it. Like Zuhause in German is like you're inside the house. Like, So Vorgestalten comes all the way back to Brentano. It's like proto-phenomenology, like pre-Freud. It's from Conrad, as he says, but it goes even farther back. It's this idea that, like, so for me, this open loop means it's like when you're looking for a pen and you don't have one yet. And when you get the pen, you're like, aha, now I can go into this process that I'm trying to complete, but that I can't. Because my loop remains open until that object is in my hand, until I satisfy that thing that I'm imagining. So, I mean, for me personally, I spend a lot of time wandering around looking for things because I'm kind of absent-minded. And so for me, that's what this is. This is like, I'm looking at things, I just can't find them. And for Gestalt, I mean, actually, maybe you could tell me what Gestalt means more precisely. Because I don't actually know. I mean,
Gestalt, I'm familiar with the Gestalt principle, that the sum is greater than the whole. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's it, right? Am I thinking of something different?
No, I think that's it.
That's it, right? That the
Yeah,
whole is great.
yeah.
The whole is greater than the sum of their parts. Gestalt principle.
That's the version I'm familiar with. Somewhere Fuchs actually says more about just gestalts.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Well, thank you for the explanation, Brian.
Yeah.
yeah, was that clear?
Oh, it's
yeah,
very clear. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the ready to hand stuff too. I think that's a pretty concise way to say it. And I think that is a good way to think about the loops also. And like that's it'd be a little bit too hard to explain that one. But Yeah, I'll let it be. Any other questions or comments about the diagram or loops for the time being?
I went on Wikipedia and like this for me explains Gestalt, which is like that yes, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but the point of the word Gestalt is that it's an organism is able to perceive an entire thing apart from its individual pieces. I think that's the
So it's
I
related to
creativity
emergence.
about
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, you can continue, Jesse.
Okay. Any
I
other?
thought about
please go
synergies. I think synergies would definitely be an example of closed loops, because isn't it part of the definition of a synergy that it's where there's both like upward and downward causation? If you have two levels of activity, you have the lower level constraining the higher level and the higher level constraining the lower level. Maybe higher and lower isn't the right way to explain it in every case.
No,
But would that be like the closed loop in a sense?
I could see that, and that like I'm thinking about Levin's podcast again because he talks about I don't know if restraint's the right word, but the way just sort of there can be top down, like the possibility space is constrained by how the top level is like, oriented or whatever. I think there's something to that, but I don't have the words for it right now.
Usually people think of it as top-down constraints and then like bottom-up information. So the constraints usually come from the top. Just the way that organization, I mean, this goes back to like entropy and other things, but it's usually top-down constraints and bottom-up information, or sometimes you guys could have bottom-up constraints, but that's usually if you're thinking about the way biology is organized vertically, it's usually top-down constraints.
That makes sense. But yeah, I definitely think like Chimero's talk about tool use lines up perfectly with this talk about closing the loop with objects in your environment.
And I think a lot of Lisa Feldman-Barrett, I was gonna write a comment in here on the side, but I'll just say I think Lisa Feldman-Barrett's work on the brain, maybe not needing to be a physical body, but the sense of having to regulate something. I think she basically says there doesn't have to be a physical body, but there has to be to combine her and Fuchs. I think she kind of gets at there has to be something by which the brain can be a mediator or perform its relational organ opportunities to fully enact the properties of what the brain is doing in terms of like providing the mediums for consciousness and everything else. So it's like I think she would be very on board with there has to be something that operates in as the relational mediator mechanism. Yeah. Okay. So we have about 15 minutes left. I think we can. I forget where here. We made pretty good progress through chapter 4, and it helps that we had kind of a full hour to an hour and then a half. So we're here. This is page 130. Okay, well, okay, so we're definitely not going to finish chapter 4 today, because chapter 4 ends at like 170.
We didn't get to transparency.
You want to get to that?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, yeah, Amanda, you were excited about it, so I wanted to hear why you were excited. That's what I'm like, hey.
Yeah, that starts on page 145.
Maybe can we get like a preview?
It's up to you.
So
I'll defer to you, Amanda. Like, how do you want to say it now and come back to it later, like next time too, or what do you want to do?
I can say a little bit now, and then we can come back after.
Okay.
I guess the first time he mentions it is 144, unless I missed something, but he doesn't really get into it until that section. So on page 144, neuroplasticity ensures that the functional cycles of organism and environment are as permeable or transparent as possible. It enables the mediated immediacy of the relation between lived body and environment, in which the brain as the mediating organ itself remains invisible. So I know we kind of skipped that neural plasticity stuff, but basically he says that in the development of the brain wants to like get in the way as little as possible. The goal of the brain is to like mediate and not to itself be an object or a factor. And in that sense, it wants to be transparent.
Yeah, he said something really nice about that stuck in my mind. I think like way back in the introduction, or like a long time ago, about like he had very poetic language about like the brain receding into the background and this other stuff. It was like.
But what I found so interesting about that discussion was transparency seems like something that you can modulate with your attention and with maybe just perhaps what task you're doing. I think maybe the flow state is interesting because of something to do with its relationship to what becomes transparent to us.
Does he? I don't know if I got fully into this section. Does he talk? Basically what you said made me think of opacity, like being able to shift how much something is blocked out or not. Does he talk about opacity in this chapter at all, or like anything that sounds like that in here?
Opacity, not explicitly, but I guess it would be, the opposite of transparency. So opacity would be like when you are aware of exactly how you're doing something. Transparency would be like you're writing, but you're not aware of, the motions of each individual muscle or like stuff like that.
Yeah, this makes me think a lot about our discussion with the ready to hand stuff, in the sense of like when you're riding your bike, the plastic bike, then like you're not thinking, oh, I have to move my leg only this much or whatever. It's like you're the whole thing. I think there's some degree of, it'd be cool to kind of get a little bit more precision. I'm at least in my understanding of like what, how can we explain that with these terms a bit more? But that's more of like me. I would like to understand it better. Not saying that Fuchs isn't saying that.
Well, in reading ahead a little bit, it looks like he returns to this concept of resonance to explain it. That transparency of the brain is achieved through like entering this kind of resonating flow state, and Vorgestalt comes back too. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think that'll.
I have a who couldn't drive because he thought that he had to become the car. He thought that he had to be aware of every single aspect of the car, and he could never do it. So
Live streaming has started.
Okay, but I always thought that was funny. I think about that a lot.
I mean, you do have to be pretty aware of a lot of things when driving or biking, but still. Yep. But,
yeah, that could be a really interesting discussion. Like I don't want to rush into resonance or anything right now, because I think that's going to be its own. I'm trying to finish up. Let me check actually where we were before that. But I have something to say about driving cars. But Amanda, did you want to go back to the text at all, or say anything more about transparency before we kind of?
You don't have to pull up the text again. I guess, what was so interesting to me is the way that transparency seems like it can be modulated through like tool use, like these examples we're talking about. Things become more or less transparent to us when we're using tools more or less proficiently. And then I was thinking how like mindfulness could possibly come in as a way to like maybe minimize transparency. Like if the goal is to become aware of the things you normally aren't aware of by, calming your mind and not paying attention to things in the environment, then could that be articulated? I know there's a lot of variety in meditation, but maybe some aspect of it could be articulated as trying to reduce transparency of certain mental processes, like when meditators talk about observing the actions of their own mind. well, that metaphor seems to fit into this nicely. And that's interesting to me insofar as it would be, it would assist methodologies in like the first person study of awareness.
Yeah, I would really like to follow up on that. If you could like make a note of that, either in Slack or in Notion or something. I think that's definitely something to, because I would, I thought of a lot of the Varela book about that, and also just it's sort of the ability to focus on what you want to do in that sense is pretty big. Like if you can basically sort of free up your RAM. You're like, okay, I'm going to close this program. I'm going to close this. I'm going to now I'm at this, that process of. And it's also really interesting. As soon as because there's sort of an emotional component to this too. Like there's the stress of having to remember stuff and then letting that go, and sort of the background stuff you don't just build up. And like, sometimes I just have to write out everything just to get out of my head, and how what is all that part of it. All right, let's. Let me look at, just pull up the book for the last, because we weren't even into, we were just about to start 4.2, and I think that's a pretty decent place to start next time.
Yeah.
Any, oh no, we already passed that. Whoops. So pass it. I know we didn't see that thing, that diagram yet.
Anything anyone else wanted to bring up before we?
I greatly appreciate Fuchs's writing on the narrative and the self. I think that's really relevant with, especially like in light of, when was this, when was this book?
2017.
Yeah. So in 2017. So yeah, I mean, I particularly have a lot of fascination with how the notions of the self and the notions of the minds and consciousness relate to the experiences of how we construct stories about who we are and things in life. So yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like finishing up this chapter, I'll just kind of go free talk for a little bit. Finishing up this chapter was, I really liked where it had some interesting novelty to see. Okay, after you really gets through resonance and sort of we do the vertical causality, and then we get into the horizontal causality. And I feel like I thought it was quite interesting. One of the lines at the end of chapter 4 is basically, or the end of the second half of this chapter is basically saying your consciousness extends to as far as you can perceive. And like everything in your immediate realm around you is the zone of consciousness. It's not just your mind and your body. And I was like, that's definitely extended, but it was a way that I hadn't fully, I don't know how I feel about it yet, but it's a way that I didn't really put it together like that before. And so let's see if I can find it quickly. But
I think another way to put that would be that the neural correlates of, this is kind of what Fuchs says, the neural correlates of consciousness are not merely neural. If you're looking for the correlate of consciousness, it would have to involve the objects in your environment.
Yeah.
But the same concept is like the neural correlate. Like you're looking for the structure that is maybe like necessary and sufficient for consciousness, and he's saying that that involves things beyond the subject. Bye, Brian.
Okay, bye, Brian. Yeah.
But yeah, and this is a bit just preview for next time. He talks about information. He kind of goes into let's look deeply at the concept of information, concept of representation, and then his sort of, well, my answer to that is resonance and patterns. And this kind of goes with like pattern completion and some of the co-articulation stuff I talked about last time, which is interesting. Yeah, and then this is mediator to immediacy. Yeah. Now these loops can combine with the fitting elements of the environment and its relevance and affordances in such a manner that coherence emerges within the entire system. Thus, the patterns or gestalts prefigured by the organism are actualized. And then,
There it is. There's the gestalts.
Yep.
the integral of the entire brain body environment nexus.
It's the integral, right?
Yeah.
And quite it's interesting. I'm a bit curious whether it's an analogy or whether it's actually an integral that can be defined mathematically or computationally. So
Yeah.
I know in this context it's being used as an analogy to the mathematical or computational integral. Although they quite literally call it an integral. It's not the actual mathematical one, but there.
It's interesting to see him bring up Aristotle too, and like all the way back to this sort of the idea and
But not everyone references Aristotle. Yeah.
And Cyril, and then what is this one? Okay. I'll let it be for that in terms of talking about the book. We'll go through all of chapter 3, and I definitely just been talking more about the transparency concept again, and sort of what we talked about with meditation and kind of opacity versus transparency, and I think that's I want to continue that thread very much.
Okay.
But yeah, any other thoughts or comments for today?
No, I like your notes on your board back there. Is that from today or?
Yeah, they're incomplete, but I was going to write more of them, not particularly for this, but just kind of some other stuff I was doing. But yeah, yeah. Okay. Any final thoughts today? I guess next time we'll look to try to finish up chapter 4, and it sounds like most people have kind of read ahead already into chapter 5. So, do you want to just say read chapter 5 too and go from there? Or also, I did want to actually leave a space for, we've kind of been writing the Fuchs strain for a month or so without any interruptions. And I do want to continue that myself. But there's a bunch of other things that have come up recently in terms of different papers and stuff we've talked about. So, how do we feel about what to focus on next, or maybe interspersing anything else, or going back to Kaplan for anything, or stuff.
Something that I can intersperse in the next meeting when we talk more about transparency is some of my thoughts on, I read that paper from Catherine Talon Baudry in the Topics in Cognitive Science, like 25th anniversary issue, whatever it was, that was like talking about the topology of phenomenology space. Because it's like this is great. This is exactly the kind of thing I've been trying to articulate and think about. But when I was kind of by the paper, but it was still thought provoking, so I could bring that up next time. And if
What
anyone
about
else wants, it's like 2 pages, so it wouldn't be hard for everyone to read it. But if you don't want to, I can just bring my thoughts.
Bring your thoughts.
I mean, if it's 2 pages but posted, I'd love to at least read it. That's
It's actually,
great.
it should be in the channel. I think in this channel. If you go back and look a little bit.
Great, I'll look back.
Yeah.
I haven't yet looked at all of them, but in other notes, I did finish reading the dynamical systems approach, the critique of that Bradley kind of mentioned. I finished that. That was good. I think you know the words were all right, but like being really clear and honest about, okay, what is novelty? What is, are you just creating another way of doing something? Are you actually replacing and being specific about that? Like it was a good sort of like what we should be looking at in terms of how to kind of take things seriously, I suppose, as opposed to just like, oh, here's an idea, it might work and might sort of replace the other one or not. Like then that's hard work to do too. So I get that, but that was good. And I did a very brief glance at some of the 25th anniversary Trends in Cognitive Science essays. A lot of them are very short. So down the road, I might continue to sort of prospect them and look at some stuff. Some of them won't really fit this group or the lab in general, but that's kind of on my radar. But yeah, okay, it's the top of the hour, so I definitely look forward to what we talked about, and then Amanda's talking about that paper and the topology stuff really cool too. Yeah, any other questions, or shall we say good night for now?
I'd say good.
Would like to compare Fuchs's models to other ones as well. Just I think that's really interesting and fascinating. So
yeah, definitely. And we can do that more in the future. But, for now, I'll say good night, everybody. Take care. See you next time.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.